Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you. That was awesome. So welcome, everyone, to our Common Read event with our guest speaker and poet, Ross Gay. I wanted to start today by thanking the Provost's office for your dedication to this event. I also wanted to thank Professor Manfredi and Professor Oz for your sound and media. Thank you guys so much. We have visitors today from our local high school early college programs. Thank you for making the trip. We're so happy to have you on campus. And finally, thank you to the first year family. Bonnie, our first year team, says, first year family, somehow we make it happen. We made it happen. And then our first year students, welcome to the family. So Ross Gay is the author of 4 books of poetry: Against Which, Bringing the Shovel Down, Beholding, winner of the PEN American Literary Gene Stein Award, and Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, winner of the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award and the 2016 King's Tufts Poetry Award. His first collection of essays, The Book of Delights, was released in 2019 and was a New York Times bestseller. His new collection of essays, Inciting Joy, will be released by Algonquin in October 22, next week. Your poems have been echoing within our walls and sometimes outside of them. We've been colliding them with our first curriculum. Our mission here at OW says empathy, says creativity, says community, says, and sustainability. Our mission's mutual. Our mission says justice. In our first year SEM, we read Plato and Frederick Douglass and Audre Lorde and bell hooks and Robin Wall Kimmerer. This year, we read you. You engage with the ancient traditions, exploring what is a virtuous life, an attentive life, a sweet life. A common reading is a bit like a garden or an orchard. It expresses our common dream to collectively dedicate our labor and love to a shared conversation. The eco-critic in me could write a small treatise on how your work embodies the ethics of engagement, how your images, rhythms, and metaphors speak to the good work of these words. But instead, let's hear your song. Let's hear you sing. Let's hear your joy and sorrow, your odes and elegies. As Roman poet Horace wrote 2,000 years ago, it is poetry you love. It is poetry I can give, and I know its worth. I, for one, love poetry and want to thank you for this gift you give, the tremendous worth it bestows upon all of us. Thank you, Russ.
Hey, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. That was a beautiful introduction. And also, let me say, it's really moving to think, even if you all read just one poem from the book, it's so moving to think that you did it and like it was chosen to be the common book. I'll tell you, I remember the second book that I read as a bigger person. When I was a little kid, I read books, Clifford and such. But when I got older, I stopped reading books. And the second book I read was a book by Jamaica Kincaid called Lucy. And it was my first year reading book. That was like the second book that I ever read, basically. But I'm going to read a handful of poems, and then I think I might just ask you all, because some of you all might want to hear poems that I don't read. So I'd like ask you to say the poems that you want to hear, See how that works. I'm so happy to see you. You look beautiful. This first one is called To the Fig Tree on 9th and Christian. And who's eating a fresh fig? Who among you? That's like 1 in 20. Next year's first year reading is just figs. A fresh fig is a delicious thing, and those trees will grow further north than we know. This is about an encounter. I'm just going to tell you the story so you don't miss it. I was walking down the street in Philadelphia, Christian Street in Philadelphia, and there was a group of people, gathered. This is Philadelphia. It's like New York. It gets cold. Gathered around like a 20 or 30-foot fig tree because the fig tree was making so much fruit that it was dropping onto the sidewalk. Fresh fruit, fancy fruit, fruit that you usually can't get at the store. It was just on the sidewalk. To the fig, it's also in the tree. To the fig tree on 9th and Christian. Tumbling through the city in my mind without once looking up, the racket in the lug work, probably rehearsing some stupid thing I said or did, some crime or other. The city, they say, is a lonely place until, yes, the sound of sweeping and a woman, yes, with a broom beneath which you are now too, the canopy of a fig, its arms pulling the September sun to it. She has a hose too, and so works hard, rinsing and scrubbing the sidewalk, lest some poor sod like me slip on the silk of a hip and not probably reach over and gobble up the perpetrator. Light catches the veins in her hands when I ask about the tree. They flutter in the air and she says, "Take as much as you can, please help me." So I load my pockets and mouth, and she points to the step ladder against the wall to mean, "Take more, please." But I was without a sack, so my meager plunder would have to suffice. And an old woman whom gravity was putting into the earth like hers, which she the kerchief as she cleaved the fig with what remained of her teeth. And soon there were 8 or 9 people gathered beneath the tree, looking into it like a constellation, pointing. "Do you see it?" And I am tall, and so good for these things. And a bald man even told me so when I grabbed 3 or 4 for him, reaching into the giddy throngs of yellow jackets, Sugarstone, which he only pointed to, smiling and rubbing his stomach. I mean, he was really rubbing his stomach, like there was a baby in there. It was hot. His head shone while he offered recipes to the group using words which I couldn't understand. And besides, I was a little tipsy on the dance, the velvety heart rolling in my mouth, pulling me down and down into the oldest countries of my body. Right, my first fig from the hand. And a man on his way to work hops twice to reach at last his fig, which he smiles at and calls baby. "Come here, baby," he says, and to kiss the tree, which everyone knows cannot grow this far north, being Mediterranean, favoring the rocky sun-baked soils of Jordan and Sicily. But no one fig tree, the immigrants. There's a way the fig tree grows in groves. It wants, it seems to hold us. Yes, I am anthropomorphizing God. Twice in the last 30 seconds, rub my sweaty forearm on someone else's sweaty shoulder, gleeful, eating out of each other's hands on Christian Street in Philadelphia, a city like most which has murdered its own people. This is true. We are feeding each other from a tree at the corner of Christian and 9th. Strangers maybe, never again. Thank you. There's a lot of trees in this book. I'm a gardener. That has something to do with it. This one's called Burial. And there's a question that I ask audiences often when I read this, and depending on where I'm asking it, I'll get different answers or no answer. So sometimes I ask, has anyone done anything with a placenta? You're not going to say? Well, also, does anyone else? Has anyone done anything with a placenta? Someone in the back. What do you say? Came out of one. That is brilliant. No one said that before. That's very important. Some people put them in the planting hole with a tree. People put them in a planting hole with a tree. What would you? Nutrients. It's full of, yeah, nutrients. Why? You know. So this is called Burial. It's about my father. You're right. The fertilizer is good. It wasn't a gang of dullards came up with chucking fish in the planting hole, or some midwife got lucky with the placenta. Oh, all the tree here. And a sudden flush of quince jam enough for months. Yes, the magic dust our bodies become cast spells on the roots about which someone else could tell you the chemical processes. It's magic. Which is why a couple springs ago, when first putting in my 2 bare root plum trees back, I took the jar which had become my father's house and longed for him and hoping to coax him back from my mother as much as me, poured some of him into the planting holes. And he dove in, glad for the robust air, sat on the tight gust, nose and mouth, chuckling as I coughed, but mostly he disappeared into the mind beyond the earth, into which I placed the trees, splaying wide their roots and casting the gray dust of my old man evenly throughout the hole, replacing then the clods of dense Indiana soil until the roots and my father were buried. Water it all in with one hand while holding the tree with the other, straight as a flag to the nation of simple joy, of which my father is now a naturalized citizen. Waving the flag from his subterranean lair, the roots curled around him like shawls or jungle gyms, like hookahs or the arms of ancestors before breaststroking into the xylem, riding the elevator up through the cadmium and into the leaves where, when you put your ear close enough, you can hear him whisper, "Good morning." Where, if you close your eyes and put your face, you can feel his stubbly jowls. And good Lord, this year he was giddy at the first real fruit set and nestled into the 30 or 40 plums in the 2 trees, peering out from the sweet meat with his hands pressed against the purple skin like cathedral glass. And imagine his joy as the sun wizarded forth those abundant sugars, and I plodded barefoot and prayerful at the first ripe plums swell and blush, almost weepy, conjuring some Shirley's ponderous birth to convey this bottomless grace. Oh Father, kind of stuff. Hundreds of hot air balloons filling my chest. Replacing his into boat keel side up. An eye, which his brother wiped before removing, keeping his hand on the forehead until the last wind in his body wandered off, while my brother wailed like an animal. And my mother said, weeping, "It's okay. It's okay. You can go, honey." All of which my father guffawed by kicking from the first bite buckets of juice down my chin, staining one of my 2 down shirts, salmon-colored silk one, hollering, "There's more of that," almost dancing now in the plum, in the tree, the way he did as a person, bent over and biting his lip and chucking the one hip out, and then the other, his elbows cocked and fists loosely made and eyes closed and mouth made trumpet. He knew he could make you happy just by being a little silly. Sweet. I'll read this one because someone introduced themselves to me out in the hallway and said that they had just read this Becoming a Horror poem. So I want to read that. Page 54. It's dragging my hands along its back. Now I should tell you that this is the first horse that I ever met. So this is like an acquaintance with a horse. Becoming a horse. It was dragging my hands along its belly, loosing the bit and wiping the spit from its mouth made me a snatch of grass in the thing's maw, a fly tasting its ear. It was touching my nose to his made me know the clover's bloom. My wet eye to his made me know the long field secrets. But it was putting my heart to the horses that made me know the sorrow of horses, the sorrow of a brook creasing a field, the maggot turning its corpse, made me forsake my thumbs for the sheen of unshod hooves, and in this way drop my torches, and in this way drop my knives. Feel the small song in my chest swell, and my coat glisten and twitch, and my face grow long, and these words cast off at last for the slow, honest tongue of horses. And maybe I'll do one more, and then we can have like, you can like, maybe you have ones you want to hear. The mistake. The backstory to this one is Loki is here in high school, so just a little bit. I was invited to go to the like, you wouldn't know it by talking to me in high school, but I was in like the classes, and I was invited, and then when I was in classes, then they kicked me out by the time I got to 9th grade. But the teacher, that middle school teacher, was so kind as to have like a little reunion party, and they invited me. It was nice. And for some really, I don't know, bad choice, I decided to take LSD a little bit earlier that day. So I went to this thing tripping on acid. Bad move. That's what this poem's about. Since you read the poem, I figure I got to tell you the story of the poem. To the mistake. It is good to know a thing or two about that of which you speak, or even be expert, which is not requisite, though a thing or two is good. Like the prop plane I know is going to land on the canvas roof of my friend's rickety Jeep, while the salutatorian to be sits in the back seat, giddy, new, in calculator. And something about Arsenio Hall, and he's like an echo chamber here with those propellers roaring above. And today in class, I am lecturing of the mistake in a poem. That hiccup or weird gift that spirals or jettisons what's dull and landlocked into as yet untraversed, i.e. cosmic. I always use this metaphor with my students. I tell this to 105, give or take, undergrad who mostly don't care. And second to second, the now blood-born drive to check their beckoning phones, which mostly, bless them, they don't. The mistake, I say, is a gift. Don't be afraid. See what it teaches you about what the poem can be. I know of what I speak. Like the 2 tabs of very potent, evidently, acid I dropped 4 hours before this reunion and graduation party of sorts for we, the gifted and talented. Corn chips, Mr. Pibb, and store-bought cookies, the texture of which sunk me knee-deep in a desert. I imagine I looked something like an opaque cloud that day. When Mr. and Mrs. Simonoski, our brainy hosts and teachers, guffawed in claymation, the tremendous speed of spit balancing on Mr. Simonoski's lip before a gust of air lifted it, and it drifted to the coarse fabric of his beard, all the spiny hairs of which seemed to scratch like cricket. And no wonder I declined the invitation from the volleyball court, although I was a Fed major in high school, and beneath the arcs, the ball painted in the sky, my classmates Lisa, Eugene, Ick, and Becky all looked a bit alien, with craniums engorged slightly and spines compressed, not even serpentine, their limbs flailing about wildly like cuttlefish, speaking only in polysyllabic, which must have made my breathy grunts all the more apish. Who knows where the poem will lead you? I tell them to let go their reins and listen to the tongue's half-wit brilliance, the corner of the mind made light by some accidental yoking of 2 impossibly joined things. 2 in the rear, I noticed their eyes on the backs of their heads, and my plastic cup of root beer by now is spilling a bit, while Mr. Simonoski laughs like a hyena, plunging its face in a ruptured gut. And nothing has ever been as clear to me as a bell that rang in my head that day. We were a 12-year experiment. The garden variety brainiacs from a suburban school, genetic incredible location, Mr. Sims' oddly large eyes and his long reptilian tail now making sense, and the way someone with an electric can opener seemed always be inside him, speaking when he spoke, now making sense. As the night winds down and the last of the cake is served, arriving with some fluorescent scrawl only I seem able to read, while all the good-natured kids whose fingernails are chewed raw and jaws pulled, who are so good, soon will be hauled into that bottomless sky under which I stumble to see what direction they're coming from. And can I run? All right. So maybe, do folks have questions now? We can start. And yeah, there's a question. Yeah. Say again? What's the horse represent to me in the Becoming a Horse poem? The horse is really a horse. The horse is really a horse. But I think the question the poem is trying to do is what happens when because I think I was reading it anew when I was hearing it, like part of the thing is like I'm getting as close to the horse as I can, like my eye gets close to and my heart becomes. So the horse is like the horse. And I think what I'm trying to do in the poem is to empathize, actually. I'm trying to understand or get as close as I possibly can to what my idea of the horse is. From that point, I have to be like, well, what might the horse be thinking about? The horse might be thinking about grass. But, the poet's mind, I think, is like the horse's heart might also be broken. The horse might know more about like, what a brook in a field means, or what a corpse turning into, what a maggot turning into a corpse means. Like that's sort of like the poetic heart, like what's in the heart of the horse. Yeah, that's a great question. Exactly, and it's a beautiful question actually, because often we think that the things in a poem represent something else, but in this case, it's really the horse is a horse, and I'm trying to get as close to it as possible. And in order to do that, I have to a little bit imagine and fantasize what a horse would be caring about. Thank you for that question. Another question? Yeah. Say it again. Like each individual poem or the book, or? Yeah, the deciding factor on how I structure my poems. This is hard. This is hard to. Partly it's intuitive. Partly it's how you feel, how I feel. But here's the thing that I think is interesting to think about for people who do or don't think about poems a lot, is that every line in a poem, and this is what makes poems different than like, stuff in paragraphs, is that the line, as I think of it, represents a breath. So every line represents a breath, which is just a poem is of an accumulation of breaths, like a body is, which to me is why poems are so interesting, because like bodies, poems also embody the fact that we're dying, that we're here for a limited amount of time. Someone that breathes is also going to stop breathing. So that to me is kind of potent. That being said, what I'm always trying to do when I organize or put my poems together is to make the thinking and the discovery hidden on the page. So I want the poem to sort of look like the thinking that's happening in the poem, So sometimes thinking is very kind of like regulated. It might have what we call end stops. It might end with like a period or a comma. Sometimes it's jarring, like in the first poem, in that poem that I just read too, it might have lines that end on the word like of, which throws you down the poem, So I'm always trying to make poems that feel like and read like the thinking that's going into the process of making them. That's a great question. And it's sort of like a question I could do like a math class on. It's a great question. Yes. On my poem Feet? And also, what's the second one? Oh, yeah. Say it again, go ahead.
I wanted to elaborate more on the poem Feet.
Yep.
Also, Tina.
Yeah. I'm going to read it. Thank you. So I'm going to read the poem Feet. The only thing sometimes is the real world still a thing. Is that on TV? Real. Yeah. You know, I know it. I know it. I know it. So the real world was a reality show, one of the early reality shows, early. And then I also mentioned this comic book, Power Man and Iron Fist. Does everyone know who Luke Cage is? Okay. That's what I read when I was like younger. I read Power Man and Iron Fist. That's what I read. Feet. Mine are ugly feet. The body is common wreckage stuffed into boots. The second toe on the left foot's crooked enough that when a child asks, "What's that?" of it, I can, without flinch or fear of doubt, lie, "The cow stepped on it," which maybe makes them fear cows, for which I repent. In love as I am with those philosophical beasts who would never smash my feet, nor sneer at them the way my mother does. "We always bought you good shoes, honey," she says. "Can't blame us for those things." And for this and other reasons, I have never indulged in the pleasure of being my 10 ostriches at the beach with friends I'm not sure love me. Though I don't think Tina loved me. She liked me, I think, but said to me as we sat on Myers beside a pool where our lifeguarded, meticulous at obscuring from view with a book or towel my screwy friends, "You have pretty feet." In that gaudy cement mixer Levitt accent that sends all the lemurs scaling my ribcage to see, she actually pretty feet. And so I took this as a kindness incomparable and probably fell a little bit in love with her for that afternoon, with the weird white streak in her hair and her machine gun chatter and her gums snapping, and so slid my feet from beneath my Power Man and Iron Fist comic book into the sun, for which they acted like plants, opening their tiny mouths to the food hurtling them through the solar system. And like plants, you could watch them almost smile, almost say, "Thank you." You could watch them turn colors and be almost emboldened, none of which Tina saw because she was probably dinging in her purse or talking about that hottie on the Real World or yelling at some friend's little sister to put her ass in her trunks or pouring the crumbs of her Fritos into her thrown open mouth. But do you really think I'm talking to you about my feet? Of course she's dead. Was her name of leukemia. So I heard. Why else would I try sadly to make music of her unremarkable kindness? I'm trying, I think, to forgive myself for something I don't know what. What I do know is that I love the moment when a poet says, "I'm trying to do this," or "I'm trying to do that." Sometimes it's a horseshit trick. Sometimes it's the way by which the poet says, "I wish I could tell you of the little factory in my head, the smokestacks chuffing, the dandelions and purslane and willows of sweet clover prying through the blacktop. I wish I could tell you how inside is the steady mumble and clank of machines. But mostly I wish I could tell you of the footsteps I hear, more than I can ever count. Of all those gates I can discern listening closely, which promptly disappear after being lodged again here where we started, in the factory where loss makes all things beautiful grow. Thanks for asking me to read that poem. Yeah, that Tina was just a friend. Like we went to high school together. She lived in the apartments where I was a lifeguard, and I knew her for a long time. And it was years since I, seen her, and then I just heard. I can't even remember how I heard. The poem came to me was I was remembering this incident with my friend, and her just being like, "Oh yeah," it moved me so much. It was just like a little comment, and I was think hard about what it is about the small gestures of kindness that register so heavily. Sometimes it's because the people who offered them to us are no longer with us. What it was, but yeah, she was lovely. Yeah. Yes, yes. Yep. To my best friend's big sister. Did you have any question or you just want to read it? Okay. Here's another one. Oh, yeah, you have a question on top of that? Say it again.
Can you explain it after you read it?
Oh, yeah. And you know what? This is like a class. Like, because if you all have like class on this book, you got the source. Ask me anything you want to know. You're all gonna get A's. We're all gonna get A's today. Okay, hang on. To my best friend now, like Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock. They were like, late '80s hip hop. I will date myself till I die. One never knows, does one, how one comes to be standing most one's pals, biggest, telling me to, gotten me to shed all but the scantest flap of fabric and twirl before her like a rotisserie chicken. As she observes and offers thoughtful critique of my just pubescent physique, which is not a thing to behold. What my damp trunks clinging to my damp crotch in proportion to grace are words, the definition of which I don't yet know. Nor did many scientists sitting open legged, now shoeless on my mom's couch. Though it may have been this morning while chucking papers, heard through the Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock pulsing my wall, a mourning dove struggling, snared in the down mouth. And without lowering the volume or missing a verse, I crinkled the rusted aluminum track enough that with a little wriggle, the bird was free and did not power line, but sat on my hand and looked at me for at least one verse of It Takes Two, sort of bobbing its head and cooing once or twice before flopping off. That seems very long ago now, as I pirouette my hairless and shivering warble of acne and pudge, burning a hole in the rug as Big Sis tosses off Greek and Latin words like pectorals and gluteus maximus, standing to show me what she means with her hands on my love handles. And now I can see myself trying to add some gaudy flourish to this memory, to make of it a fantasy, which is why I linger, hoping to misrecall the child me, make of me someone I wasn't, make of this experience the beginning of a new life. Gilded doors kicked open, blaring trombones, a full background, and me wandering forth on the wild steed of emergent manhood. That child was not that child. Hearing as he was his breasts by tucking his hands into his armpits, and had never been made love to himself yet, was not candidate much. As the chill of a minor shame that he would forget what would prove to be stitched together a quilt with all its just legible patterning, which won't be buried in, or instead might be held up by it, where we see the threads barely holding, so thin and frail, so and sad and small to remove. Yeah, that sort of a little bit like the fake poem, like it's something that was triggered, a memory that was triggered. I can't remember how the memory was triggered, but basically, the poem as it gets to that regular awkward exchange or situation. That, to be clear, was just like an awkward situation. It was nothing more than that. And but that was a moment, like many moments we have over our lives, that if you don't kind of look at them, on some occasion to meditate on them and just be like, oh, that was weird. Or like, oh, just to think, just to put it out in the air, they can kind of turn into these sort of things that you're like ashamed of, And I was sort of thinking about this just, common but also awkward interaction as one of those moments where I hadn't even, and I do this a lot, probably a lot of us do this a lot. Like there's, you have an experience and you just put it away. It might not be that big a deal, but just enough in it, just a little bit of potent something, shame maybe, I think is very potent. Put it away. But to have it come out and be like, oh yeah, wasn't that strange? Feels like a kind of relief. And that's kind of the metaphor of being like, you can have all these little minor shames, and it might be something like, like you're in high school and you got a bad grade on the test, your teacher puts the test score on the thing, and you're like that could minor shame that you never actually dispense with, they pile up and they pile up. And so the idea is like, you could bury yourself in all those shames, or if you're lucky enough to have the opportunity to sort of think about them and share with other people and commonly hold our shame in a certain kind of way to dispense them. It's just like quilts, and you can see all the light through it. And that's sort of how I thought about it. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, here's the question. Yeah, I'm pointing at you.
Did you ever appreciate these awkward moments that you recall when you had writer's block?
Do I ever recall these moments when I have writer's block? Oh, do I appreciate them? Yeah, absolutely. Because they're me, because all what I'm doing is meditating on stuff that I have questions about in my life. So if I have so many things that I have questions about in my life. So which is also to say that if I have in my mind, I have like I'm able to tap those things, I don't have writer's block. You know what I'm saying? So which is also to say like I'm happy to be able to access all the the places of my life as a writer, because at this point I know there's no bottom to what I have questions about. So, and here's the other thing. I get writer's block when I have assignments. Always. So it's a different thing when I'm writing for myself, or I'm writing, working on a book that I don't have an assignment on. It's just like the book that I'm working on. I kind of can always do that. But, I used to spend years, people would, talking to students, and people would say, so how do you deal with writer's block? And I would say, I don't get it. And here's how I don't get it. And then eventually I was like, fuck bullshit. Get writer's block anytime you have careers. And you got to figure out how to kind of get through. But as far as my writing life, my sort of imaginative life, that is not on a clock, that there's not a deadline, but it doesn't get blocked up too much. I just had too many, I'm too puzzled, too many questions. Yeah, I want to go, there was someone over here, yeah. Oh, great question. I'm going to read it. Sharing with the ants. Page 55. That's a great question. I love that question. It's like you're arguing with the person in the poem. Like, what are you doing? Sharing with the ants. A euphemism for some yanking call, no doubt. Some mumble or other, like monkey spanking or of course your mind goes there. Loosey goose that you are. Me too. You have a favorite? Don't lie. I've heard you say that. Tending a hive, eating the melon. How's the tongue traffic? Or as a massage therapist would say to my pal when his loneliness dragged him to a carpeted room in an apartment building in Chinatown where the small hands lathered his body, opened the door. Naturally, sharing with the ants, some entomologic metaphor, the chronic yoke in lovemaking, not only of body to body, but life to death. Sharing with the ants. Or the specific act of dragging with the tongue one's sweat-gilded body from the tibias, looking along the rope bridge of the families marching across the long plains of the calf, meticulously unnamed zone behind the knee, over the hamstring, into use your imagination for Christ's sakes. But I will tell you, it is dark there and sweet, sharing with the ants. But that's not at all what I'm talking about. I mean, actually sharing with the ants, which I did September 21st, a Friday in 2012, when by fluke or whim or prayer, I jostled the crotch-high fig tree whose few fruit had been scooped by our fat friends, the squirrels. I found shriveled and purple into an almost testicular papoose, smuggled beneath the fronds of a few leaves, one stalwart fruit, which I immediately bit in half, only to find a small platoon of ants twisting in the meat. And when I spit out my bite, another 4 or 5 lay sacked out, their spindly legs pedaling slow, nothing, one barely looking at me through a half-open eye, the way an infant might, curled into its mother's breast. And one stumbled dazed through my beard, tickling me as it tumbled head over feet, over head, over feet, back into the bite in my hand, the hooked sabers of their mandibles made soft, kneading the flesh, their claws heavy and slow with fruit, their armor plush as the seeds shone above, the sounds of their work like water appear at night. And not one to disrupt an orgy, I mostly gobble around their nuzzle and slurp, careful not to chomp a reveler. And nibbling one last thread of flesh, I note the dozy ant nibbling the same toward me, its antenna just caressing my face, its pincers slowing at my lips, both of our mouths sugared and shining, both of us twirling beneath the fig's seed, spinning like a newly discovered galaxy that's been there forever. So the reason that I didn't get rid of the fig is because I only had one fig. The tree only made one fig that year, so I had to eat it. And I could avoid the ants, you know. But here's a good thing too, that poem, like as I was reading it, I haven't read that one for a little bit. It's like a fantasy too, you know. So part of the fantasy is that I'm making everything like a little bit wild. Like I could, the ants weren't really like sacked out, you know. The ants were kind of doing what ants do. But that end thing, I'm sort of like, partly what I'm trying to sort of suggest is like the delight of this fig, the preciousness of this fig is too much to abandon because I'm going to have to get close to something that maybe I'm not supposed to get close to, you know? So that's, I mean, so the fact of the matter is I had to get a little bit of fig too. But the special sort of poem part of it is that I kind of want to imagine like, hey, like, how do we get closer? That's actually part of the thing. How do we get closer? You know, it's okay. It's okay. People got hurt. I mean, hopefully I didn't get any ants. But the ant would be the one who was bummed out, not me for that. Yeah. This one? Wedding poem? Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you. Wedding poem. And I'll tell you before I read this one, this was like probably one of the fastest poems. How to say that? I mean that. This is one of the, this poem came out as fast as any poem that I've ever written, partly because my friends asked me to write a poem for their wedding, Keith and Jen, the poems too. And I procrastinate. That's what I do. And it was the morning of their wedding and I hadn't written it. And I was like, I got to write this wedding poem. So this is what happened. Wedding poem. Friends, I am here to modestly report seeing an orchard in my town, a goldfinch kissing a sunflower again and again, dangling upside down by its tiny claws, steadying itself by snapping open like an old-timey fan its wings again and again, until swooning it tumbled off and swooped back up to the very same perch, where the sunflower curled its giant swirling of seeds around the bird and leaned back to admire the soft winds nudging the bird's plumage. And friends, I could see the points on the flower's stately crown soften and curl inward as it almost indiscernibly lifted the food of its body to the bird's slain mouth, whose fur I could hear from 20 or 30 feet away, and see from tiny holes that sail from their good racket. Which good racket? I have to and rock up on my tippy toes, barely purse my lips with what I realized now was being simply glad. Which such love, if we let it, makes us feel. How are we on time? Yeah, a couple more. Yeah. Yeah, come on. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, so let me just describe this poem called Come On. And this is a poem that's sort of like, there's a couple poems, excuse me, in this book that are about my mother, and they're sort of about my mother after my father died. So, they were married for like 35 years. My father died. It was profoundly wrecked. Her world was, we were all devastated, but her world was, completely turned inside out. And in a way, some of these poems are like trying to understand the depths of grief and the kind of courage actually of her grief, that she was just grieving, and that's what she was doing. And this poem sort of wants to try and consider that and honor that, actually. Come on. Come on. My mother sings, nor the bird, but the moon across the laced hands of the nest, the palm on a fevered brow. She was born a crab, waving the twin flags of her pinchers. That's one of those poetry lies. Truth is, my poor mom's hands bruised our butts, so that was the end of that. And when the monk slapped her ass, she didn't kick him downstairs, but slipped the saffron tail in the pocket. Truth is, my mother's brave as a bison. For years, she dragged her hooves through the ash of her heart, head down, rising in ghosts from her. Here's where nary a blade of grass, nary birdsong. But one day, a small seed took hold, and another. Soon, beetles and spiders came back, and then birds were chatting in the new growth. Right now, a family of elk crosses a stream, and behind them on a hillside, a galaxy of wildflowers shimmers and hollers. Come on. Yeah, and I want to tell you a couple. Go ahead. Yeah, that's like a story. Like she was in a monastery somewhere, and someone's, Yeah, so that's a funny thing. Like, and this is a thing that I realize in my poems I'm doing this, but I have kind of like these embedded meanings in here. And in a way, it's a poem like it's sort of really to my mother. So my mother's a Cancer. Her birthday's the twin pinchers. She's waving the twin because she's a crab. So there's that. There's like a couple of this story about the monk slapping her in the ass. And there's my poor mom's hands bruised on our butts. We were little and she tried to spank us. She wasn't built for it. she couldn't do it. And she tells a story, her hands would get bruised. She'd break all the bells in her hands, so she stopped. So there's only little bits about my mother that, you really know my mom, you might know some of these stories. But in the outside of that room, it feels a little more like, I guess, make you wonder, I guess. Like how did you relate to that? Were you just wondering, like, how did you relate to it? Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's like a beautiful response to how to read poems, actually, though. Just to be in the middle of it. Yeah, to not know it's abstract or literal or figurative. Yeah. Yeah, here's a question. Patience. Yeah, maybe I'll read that and maybe we'll wrap it with that, probably. Because I think you want to though. Yeah. Okay. Patience. Call it sloth, call it sleaze, call it bummery if you please. I'll call it patience. I'll call it joy. This moss pine Congress with the newly yawned grass and beetles chittering in their offices beneath. As I, nearly drifting to dream, admire this so-called weed, which, if I guarded with teeth bared my garden of all alien breeds, if I was all knife and axe and made a life of hacking, would not have burst gorgeous forth and beckoning these sort of phallic spires, ringleted by these sort of vaginal blooms, which the new bees, being bees, heed. And yes, it is spring, if you can't tell from the words my mind makes of the world. And everything makes me mild or more hungry. The worm turning in the leaf field, the pear blooms howling forth their pungence like a choir of wet-dreamed boys hiking up their skirts. Even the neighbor's cats shimmy through the grin in the fence. And the way this bee before me, after whispering in my ear, dips her head in those dainty lips. Not exactly like a child. And friends, if that wasn't enough, blooms forth with her forehead dusted pink, like she has been licked and so blessed by the kind of God to whom this is prayer. Yeah, I'm so glad you asked me to read that. Because another poem I don't read that often. In a way, like I'm just sort of describing the pleasures of doing jack shit. Just like laying down in the grass, and I happen to have a garden, and so I always have stuff to do. And then, mow the lawn, that kind of stuff. And in this case, I was just laying in the grass. And on account of my laying in the grass, I actually look the way that some of these flowers are looked. And more magical, and it was also spring, and so it's blooming, things were moving. But the thing that I noticed that I would not have noticed had I been busy being productive was the way that this bee, as it was pollinating this flower, it came out like it had a purple black on its forehead. It happened because I wasn't doing jack shit. Like I was able to witness this impossibly beautiful thing because I wasn't being productive. I was being patient, So thank you for that question. Hey, I think we got to wrap. I wish I could answer your question, but look, thank you so much for reading this book. I'm grateful to you. Have a great year. Have a great year.